right. Okay, so hello everyone, welcome. We have a couple of participatory exercises. There's mainly one that we can only do 6 or 7 people per 6 tables. So that's why we have tables set up, and that's why we have a sheet to sign in. If there's still some spaces on the table and you want to sit in there, you can do it. Go for it now. If you want to just stay at the back and hear what we're talking about and participate when you feel like it, that's totally fine as well. Anything that we propose is you can choose to do it or not. We're not going to force you. We're not using coercion here. Let's try not to use either social coercion. So I'm Nati, or Natalia. I'm from Argentina. That's my strange accent. So if you can't understand me very well, do ask me. I'm from Loomio, from the Loomio platform, Loomio co-op, that Rich is going to introduce a little bit more of what it is if you don't know it yet. And also from the Inspiral network that he's also going to introduce a bit more. And the two of us, we are also, we started a small thing called the HUM. And the HUM is our small coaching, consulting, training kind of branch of Loomio, and we're doing these kind of workshops all over the world. So we're going to give you like a really condensed 90-minute version of what we do in 6 hours. So we're going to try to fit a lot of content, but also we're going to make a lot of space for the discussions and the participation. Yeah? And I'll pass it on.
We've got a lot to cover. I'm going to try and not go on because I just think it's so fascinating, the stuff that I talk about. We come from the HUM, we come from Loomio, we come from Inspiral. All those things are complex, and people ask us about what is this Inspiral thing all the time. I'm going to give you the smallest, most abstract, condensed lessons from Inspiral rather than tell you what it is. So we've got a couple 100 people. They are all trying to work on stuff that matters. So co-ops and social enterprises working on food systems, mental health, adult education, governance, like stuff that matters. You notice it's a very open-ended definition. And the other thing we have in common is a profound allergy to corporate hierarchy. So we're working on meaningful stuff, and we're trying to do it in a self-organizing, non-hierarchical, fluid, dynamic, participatory, horizontal, whatever the word is for the thing we're doing. We don't like to have a boss. So if you think of Inspiral as a network of co-ops, you're close enough. It's not quite true, but it's close enough. One of my roles within Inspiral has been to move from one co-op to the next and cross-pollinate, so to see what are you really good at and what are you struggling with in your attempts to be self-organizing and efficient, and to take the lessons from there and transplant them to the next co-op and back and forth and so on. So that's a lot of my context where I start to say that there are patterns of decentralized organizing. That's where I started to recognize patterns, that all of these people seem to confront very similar challenges. Another thing that's honest and true to say about Inspiral is that we're very committed to transparency. So if you want to know the specific rules that we use, like you've got 250 people that are sharing a brand and a bank account and tons of money, and nobody's in charge, and somehow it all works. I mean, it's chaos, but it still exists 8 years later. You can read the rules in the handbook.inspiral.com. That's the official legislation that governs us. And then if you much prefer to read stories, go to the blog. There's lots of people telling stories from what it's like to be trying to invent the future of work. Loomio is one of those co-ops in the network, and that's where Nati and I first started working together. And I mentioned it on the main stage. If you weren't there, it's a discussion forum, but there's special tools in it that allow you to make decisions with people. So a lot of co-ops are using it, but also many other kinds of groups, from radical activists over to city governments and boards of directors, just lots of different groups that are trying to do decision making in an inclusive manner without always spending their entire life in meetings. In addition to building software, we've also built a company that attempts to embody and reinforce our values rather than undermine them, so that we've had to learn a lot about investment and financing and management and conflict resolution and how do you distribute labor and all of this stuff. A lot of it we've invented or remixed from other sources, and that's all documented in our co-op handbook, Loomio.coop. So some of the things we're going to mention today, which we won't have enough time to go into the detail, if you want to do your homework, you'll find the actual agreements that govern us are there. So this was our travel last year, and we have to update the map and add another 7 or 8 countries because we just keep moving. New Zealand is a lovely place for a holiday, but it's a little bit boring, so we've been moving all over the place. And as we travel, we are visiting any kind of group that is trying to do something inclusive, participatory, democratic, horizontal, whatever the word is, and asking them what are they struggling with when they try to work in this way. So up here we have the Seoul city government, and they're trying to engage with millions of citizens, and then down there we have an NGO, a very informal group working in slums in Buenos Aires and Argentina, trying to build houses for people that don't have them. In Berlin, we're working with startups. In New York, we're working with corporate consultants, like very different kinds of people who don't recognize each other as having shared problems. But through our informal research project, we have identified what we think are shared problems, and the good news is shared solutions. So we're going to run through a handful of them today to give you a flavor of what we're thinking about. We made a cool chart. It's got colors on it. The point of this is not to say, it's not a framework, it's not a comprehensive, it's not complete. You'll notice that the circle is open at one side because it just keeps growing out there. Like we're not trying to present you with, these are all the answers, and if you just do these, you'll be fine. Our hypothesis is that the best shape for your organization is going to be unique to the people in the context that you're in. But we're going to give you some material that you can at least use in your remixing, and some ideas about how the remixing actually works. So enough blah blah, let's hear from someone interesting. Nati's going to do the first half.
As Rich mentioned, we're going to name some of these things. We're not going to go through all of them, but we're going to cover at least 8 of them, just because it's too much info, and you can read a bunch of it online as well. So the first half is about culture, right? So when we say that we want to work in a different way, in a decentralized organization, we're going to be flat, non-hierarchical, we're going to collaborate, cooperate. There's all these really nice words and feelings, but reality is that we all come from a very hierarchical society. We all have triangular heads, more or less. There's probably a lot of us that have a lot of experience already trying to collaborate, and we learn new skills and new ways of being. But when we come into a group and try to collaborate together, we need to be able to build a different way of being together as well. So why is culture one of the first ones we talk about and not our digital tools? Is because for us, the way that you build the culture of the group, the way that you learn how to be together in a different way, is what is going to inform anything else that you do together. So if you get this one right, and that's why we say belonging is a superpower, although it could be really hard to read because for some reason it looks small, that means that that sense of belonging, that sense of being a team, being together, and finding new ways of being is what is going to solve all the other challenges that you face. One of the things that we know is that we can't really tell you what is the right culture, what does it need to look like, because, as Rich mentioned as well, it's up for the team that you have and for the people that you have in your group to figure that out together. But one of the things that we know is that psychological safety is the #1 ingredient of thriving groups. And what does psychological safety mean? It's basically when people feel safe to be themselves, they can bring their whole self into work. When they feel safe to disagree, to raise their voice and say, no, actually, I don't think that's the best thing we can do. And where they can bring new ideas as well and feel that they won't be judged. So those are a few little things that build this sense of psychological safety. And how do we do that in our teams? In Loomio and Inspiro, we put a lot of emphasis into this part, and we spend a lot of time together, getting to know each other. Not talking about work, but getting to know each other. And one of the ways of doing that is going on retreats. So for Inspiro, we try to do it twice a year, and for Loomio as well. It's spending 3 or 4 days all together, just getting to bond again, right? A lot of us work on the computer, we work decentralized, we're in other countries, we're remote. So coming together is part of remembering what we look like, what we smell like, what we sound like when we're in the same room. I'm going to rush through it a bit. Oh, great. Whew. Okay, another way of building that psychological safety is caring for each other. And maybe some of you have heard of the words care labor or emotional labor. And what that means is basically all those little acts of caring that we do for each other all the time, right? It's very common in relationships. You're caring for each other. You care for your friends. You pay attention. You send them a little message. Hey, how you doing? You bring, you're going for a picnic and someone is going to bring the snacks. And you're in your teams and in your groups, you need the same kind of things. It's just that we forget that those are also part of the work and that they are important things in a team. So basically what we do is we name all those tasks of caring for each other as tasks that need to happen for the group to be together. And we talk about it, we talk about care labor, we acknowledge all those things as work as well, and we distribute it among each other. So we have what we call stewardship, and if you check on our Loomio handbook, you're going to see on the part about caring for each other that names stewardship. It's basically like a buddy system or a peer support system, but it goes in a circle. Instead of being, I care for you, you care for me, it goes in a circle. I care for you, you care for him, like that. And at the end, someone will be taking care of me. So we're always practicing taking care of someone and being cared by someone else. And what that means in practice is we meet together once a month with our steward, and we say, how can I support you this month? What do you need from me? What kind of support do you need? And those relationships are built according to the people's needs that are in those connections. What this means as well is that those relationships of support are very important for us in our conflict resolution. So if you have a conflict with someone in your team and you don't have a boss to go and say, hey, I don't like this thing that is going on with this person, because we don't have that, at least you can have that support with each other. So I'll go to my steward and say, hey, can you support me to have a conversation with this person? I'm having this conflict and I don't know how to solve it. So for us, taking care of each other is very important, key of the work as well. And what it means is that in this space of taking care of someone and being cared by someone else, the emotional intelligence of our group grows slowly over time. Because there's people that are really good at it, and there's people that maybe are not that good at it, but they can practice and they can learn from someone else. So we move those relationships around every year, more or less. In some groups, it's a bit less than that. In some groups, it's a bit more. Then, so being explicit about our norms and boundaries is a big part of it. This is very common in a lot of communities, especially activist communities, where you go in and there's a sign on the wall that says, in this space, we don't want sexism, we don't want racism, we accept everyone. And it's very odd in some other kind of groups and some other communities, where it's like, what do you mean we need to talk about it? It's common sense, like we all know how to treat each other. And what we always say is that common sense doesn't actually exist for us, right? Because what is common sense for me, it might be completely different than what it is for you, and what it is for you, and what it is for you. So when we can actually talk about it and talk that big question again, how do we want to be together? And how do we don't want to be together, right? It's marking the norms and marking the boundaries. And that helps to solve a lot of the conflict before it even starts. Because to start, you have it there, right? So if someone comes in and does a sexist joke, then we can say, hey, remember we agreed that that's not a thing that we do here? And if you do really enjoy doing sexist jokes, maybe you need to be in a different kind of team where they enjoy doing those things, right? So you can solve that conflict instead of spending a whole week trying to talk about why sexism is not okay and why a sexist joke is actually not even a joke, and trying to make those agreements when there's a moment of conflict and tension. So being able to explicitly name those things, it gives you an easier way to solve conflict, but it gives you also a space for the buy-in of someone. So if someone wants to join your team and they want to understand what kind of culture do you have, with the norms at least is one way of showing that, one way of showing the kind of things that you do here. One thing that I forgot to mention, so I'm going to go back, is that we agree on those norms collectively. It's not that it's one person, let's say it's the founder of the team, they decide what the norms are and that's the way it goes. We have that conversation and we name them together and we agree them collectively, and then we review them. And this is a very important thing as well, because it doesn't mean that the norms that we agreed on today are going to be the same ones that we want to have in 5 years' time, when half of the people in the team have changed, and we have changed as well, and our context has changed. So if you can agree on them collectively and review them periodically, then you're kind of halfway there. Okay, this is a really huge one, but I'm going to go fast. Great. So basically, again, we work with a lot of groups that say that they're non-hierarchical and that power is decentralized and we're all equals here. And it's a great goal to have, but in reality, we have never met a group that has achieved it. Because there are different kinds of power, and there are different kinds of power dynamics that always play in a group of humans. So I'm just going to basically name 2 kinds of power. There's several definitions about this, but I'm going to name one that is power over, and that's the kind of coercive power. That's the kind of power that when we say we want to be equals, that's the kind of power that we're fighting against. We're fighting against someone telling us what to do and how to do it, and if we don't, there will be negative consequences for us, right? That's coercion. And then there's another kind of power that it tends to play in a lot of groups that is what is called power with, or maybe some of you know it as social capital. And that's the idea that maybe you've been here the longest. Maybe you have a lot of expertise in a particular topic. Maybe you are always taking on responsibilities and being able to commit to them and deliver. So there's different layers of expertise, of reputation, of experience, of eldership. And those kind of things give you a particular power or influence in a group. And that's not a negative influence. That could be a very positive one. It can turn coercive, and that's the problem of not talking about it, right? So what we say is, talk about the power in your group. Like, how's the weather? Like, how's the power? How's it going? Who has it? Who doesn't? And what do we want to do about it as a group? Maybe you want to have certain points where there's more expertise, and that's fine, and they have extra points on decision making, and that's okay as well. But maybe you don't want to have it. Let's say maybe your board is all older white men, and maybe there's a power imbalance there that is not done by reputation, but by layers of privilege. And that's a whole different workshop, so I'll keep on moving. But the idea is that in our teams, we talk about it, and we distribute the roles that condense a lot more social capital. So we used to have one coordinator, and it's a person that is overseeing a few different working groups. And we decided that that person was achieving a lot of social capital. It was like a deep point in our team. So we created a working group of coordinators, and we always have 3 people in that role, and we rotate them around the team. So everyone has a go at being a coordinator and being in that position of a little extra power. So that not only changes a little bit the social dynamics, the social power, social capital dynamics, but also gives resilience to your group. Because when you have different people being able to move through those roles, then any one of them can step out and the group is not going to collapse. You're still holding each other, right? So that's a pretty important one. Also, if you are in one of those positions of power, and hopefully after this micro talk, you are like, oh yeah, that's a great idea, I'm going to start distributing that power. And you want to do it, that's great. But be aware that it takes time as well for people to learn a new role, and it takes time for them to get into a place where they feel empowered to do it. So you need to be also patient, and you need to set up some spaces for mentorship and support for that person to be able to step in as well if you step out. Yeah? That's a very short version. Yes. So I know it's really fast, and you probably are still like trying to hear the first slide, but let's just take a moment of reflection, just a silent moment, so it's like personal reflection, just to think about a few things that you heard. Think about, you might not be able to read those questions, it's fine. It's just to digest a little bit what is being said.
I want to talk about decisions. Our slides got a bit jangly, that's okay. My experience, when I was 24, I sat in my first circle and did my first consensus decision. This was part of the Occupy movement. If you see me doing this, indicating my agreement and support, that's where it came from. And the consensus process for me was really transformative. So the couple of weeks of Occupy Wellington were the most rapid period of personal development in my life. And so I associated all this good learning and growth and stuff very closely with the consensus process. I thought, aha, I've been excluded from decisions all my life. Now there's a process that I've learned about where you can include people in decisions. This is going to solve all of our problems. I had a hammer and everything looked like a nail. So we built a company that's all about consensus, da-da-da. Over time, I realized that consensus is not the tool for every job. Like, usually when we have a workshop, we have snacks. So this example would work in that case. Imagine there were some snacks here. We might be a consensus organization, but I don't need to have a meeting with you and decide together what are the right snacks to bring, right? Like I can take that initiative and just bring some snacks. And in any organization, you have a range of different ways that decisions are being made. And often there's not an explicit agreement about these are our different decision-making methods. And so what I wanted to offer was just, we're going to name a few different ways of doing decisions. We're going to play with some, practically. And then you can see you've got some more tools in your toolbox. So you don't only have a hammer, you'll have other ones too. I'm going to do the simplified version, which is going to obscure some of the complex realities, and you'll forgive me. So, in simple terms, you don't have to forgive me, but I request your forgiveness. In simple terms, the first one, the least collaborative one is a mandate. So usually in our case, that would be you'd have some kind of meeting, some kind of negotiation, and you would assign a mandate to someone, and you would say, Nati, you're in charge of marketing. If there's any marketing decisions, you just make them. You've got a budget of 5,000 euros. You don't have to ask permission. That's your job. Just be transparent. Like if someone comes to you with a question, you should answer it, but you don't have to seek opinions before you act. So the really mature groups, most of their decisions are happening on a mandate basis. The second one, this caused a big stir. There's a book called Reinventing Organizations. People got really excited about it. And one of the useful nuggets in there, aside from all the abstract theory and storytelling, is a specific decision-making process they call advice, the advice process. And as I understand it, in the advice process, if you're using advice, anyone can take any decision if they take responsibility for the outcome, and they first seek input from anyone with expertise or anyone who's going to be affected. So taking responsibility and seeking input from. Now, the important thing is you just have to seek the input. You just have to hear the advice. You just have to listen, make sure that you've heard it, and then you make the decision, right? We're not doing the step where we're negotiating for agreement. We're just listening, checking in. Okay, I heard you. This is what I'm going to do. So you get most of the benefit of the collective intelligence without all the negotiation of a consensus decision. Now, the distinguishing between a consent and a consensus decision is a little bit of a fuzzy task, and this is where I simplify. But for argument's sake, let's say a consent decision is when you get everyone, you negotiate until nobody has a strong objection, compared to a consensus decision where you're trying to negotiate until everyone agrees, or at least everyone can agree this is the best that we can come up with for now. And they're very different modes. So if I have a proposal, I want to do this I've got this cool idea, I want to change our office and put purple paint on the wall. Can I check if there are any objections? That's me asking for consent. It's quite a different mode and a much slower mode if I say, hey, I've been thinking the office is a bit dull. What would be some ideas about how we could change that? Would you be up for maybe we could decorate? I'd like to paint. How about purple? It's going to be a long negotiation to get to a conclusion. So in our case, we use all of these decision-making protocols. We've got it documented which ones are appropriate for which job. It's hot. We should do this by experience rather than listening to me talk about it. We need to hand out the thingies. So we're going to invite you to play a game at your table. The game can support 6 players. So if there are any tables that have less than 6, can you signal any of those extra people to come and join you? The point that I want to illustrate is that there is an immense difference between your preference and your tolerance. So my preference might be, I really want an apple. I want to eat an apple. But I could tolerate really any kind of fruit, right? I don't want junk food, I object to junk food, but I will tolerate any kind of fruit. And to be able to identify what is your preference, both what is your preference and your tolerance, is a really helpful ingredient to any deliberative process, because often what happens in a deliberation is that people get stuck in a state where they're simply advocating for their preference. I think we should have apples. I think we should have oranges. I think we should have apples. No, we should have oranges. Usually it's more complex decisions than that, but they're advocating for the thing. And my observation is that once people have had their preference acknowledged, aha, you want oranges. Once they've been heard, once they've been listened to, they're much more willing to negotiate and find concessions and some shared ground. So we've got an exercise that helps to visualize what are people's preferences and what could they tolerate. And you can do this we've got a decision-making scenario, which is kind of a game that you're going to play. But you can do something very similar in your actual groups when you're stuck on a difficult decision, to visualize where do people stand on an issue, and it helps the deliberation move a lot more quickly. So the idea with these charts that we've got these overlapping circles. What I'm trying to show is there's a small space in the middle, which is your preference. That's me wanting my apple. And there's a wider space, which is my tolerance. Any kind of fruit would be fine. And then everything outside of those circles is an objection. Right? When you add a second person to this, you see that the space where our preferences overlap is very small. And the more people you add to that chart, the smaller that overlapping preference gets. And so if you're trying to do consensus and get everyone to align their preferences, that's a lot of work. Sometimes you need to do it, but you don't when it's about what snacks are we having. So what consent does, it says we can use this whole space of tolerance. So long as nobody objects to the option, we've got a consent decision. So we're going to embody that with the exercise. You've got these little mini post-it notes. They're in stacks. We need one stack of post-it notes per person. There's 6 of them, and they're color-coded to match the 6 options on the decision-making scenario. So each sheet has a decision-making scenario. The options are color-coded. You want to take those tickets and write your initials on them so you can track that those ones are yours.
One per person.
And then you've got 2 jobs to do at the table. One is to decide what kind of decision-making protocol are you going to use. And we recommend either advice, consent, or consensus. And then you have to, the decision-making scenario on your table, you need to come to a decision. We're going to give you 15 minutes to come to a group decision. You may play a character. If you want to be a stick in the mud or devil's advocate, or you can be a character if you like. But the point is, we want you to negotiate until you get to some kind of decision, and then after 15 minutes, we'll hear how far you've got. So the process, we need to have a private moment where you read the options out quietly to each other, and you consider for yourself, could I tolerate that option? Do I prefer that option? Do I object to it? So quietly for yourself, decide there's 6 options, and this is my position on those options. And then you reveal your preferences by sticking them on the sheet where it says, I tolerate or I prefer. So you can all put your tickets into the I section. And then through negotiation, if you see that there's some overlap, like if everyone prefers the same option, you can move those tickets into we prefer. So the object is to move things in until you find some agreement. Is anyone bamboozled and confused? All right, the written instructions will help, and we'll wander around to keep people going. So there's a private moment first, then a reveal, and we're going to give you 15 minutes to get to a conclusion.
I would love to hear a little reflection from each table. Not about like what was the solution and things like that, but just tell me, what did you notice? What happened when you were doing the exercise? What were some of the noticings about this kind of thing?
Well, in this particular task, we struggled with a lack of identity. Because you just said you're collective, so because we had no identity, very difficult to have any deep discussion. So we resolved that by giving ourselves an identity and then talking about it.
I think we reached a point where we felt that the type of decision-making protocol that you're using wasn't that helpful, because actually the results that you put on the chart were telling you where there was consent or where there was consensus. So it was kind of coming out of it. The other thing that was really useful was discussing where people put things near the boundary, or asking people why they were inside or outside a particular circle, because their arguments could actually sway where other people put their their bits.
I think, is it on? I think we were discussing more sort of the procedures of how we were to make the decision on what basis, and I would go in and with on consent or with the consensus. So we were very much discussing sort of the structure, the meta structure behind it. So we were not clear in how we would proceed after we had voted.
It's quite hard to pass through all this, but I'll make it that way.
I think it became clear we had a shared consensus pretty much existed already on what to do, and we found consensus so quickly we had to make it more difficult for a second round.
It depends on which kind of how do you call it? If we decide by consensus or consent. So if there is consent, it's a clear solution. If it is consensus, we need to discuss. We don't have a clear solution. It seems to me. I would agree.
Well, I thought the most interesting development was the invention of a new solution, which I thought was actually better than any of the given choices. And with a little more time, we would have converged on it.
Can I ask, like, how many of you were trying to make a decision by trying to fit all your tickets into the we prefer? Because it tends to be that that's the space where a lot of groups try to focus, is on trying to find the space where everyone prefers that solution. So part of doing this is visualizing as well that if you're trying to, if you open up a space for tolerance as well, then the space for agreement is much bigger than you can find otherwise. There's someone that wants to say something.
I think we all agreed that we reached the wrong answer after we finished the exercise, which was interesting. And the other one was, how do we figure out which protocol to use? Because you need a protocol to figure out the protocol.
Yeah, that's always part of the game.
Yeah, those are handed down by a deity. I'm gonna move right along after that. Just in the interest of time, I'm trying to cover a lot of ground. Thank you for your participation. This is, I guess, the bit where the Loomio comes in, making decisions asynchronously. Since the dawn of humanity, when we need to make a decision with a group of people, we do it in a meeting. Like if you want to be inclusive and bring a lot of people along on an important decision, you do it in a meeting. And in the last maybe decade or two, we've augmented our meetings with video conferencing technology. So you can include people from different cities, but you still are bound to that synchronized real-time moment where everyone has to pay attention together. And the proposition with Loomio is that you can make some of your decisions without doing it in a meeting. So people can participate asynchronously. They can do it in their own time. And we've been using the Loomio software and the Loomio co-op since we started, right? Like trying to figure out what kind of decisions are appropriate to do on the computer and when do we need to have a meeting. And over the years, we've discovered like a choreography between the real-time face-to-face and the asynchronous digital space. And that those two things have different qualities and they're both good. You know, so we're not trying to obliterate meetings, we just want to make them a bit better. So meetings are really good for anything that involves emotion. Like if I've got a risky proposal, I want to do it in a meeting so that I can see, oh, someone's getting really upset, I better adjust what I'm saying. There we go. You can do that when you're reading each other's body language. You can't do that with an email. You send the email and it lands and then they get angry and et cetera, et cetera. So if it's got to do with anything risky, anything that involves yeah, emotion, complexity, trust. Like if you're dealing with an interpersonal relationship that's going a bit sideways, don't do that on the computer, right? On the other hand, meetings have limitations. Like essentially, I mean, we've just demonstrated how difficult it is to hear people when there's multiple people speaking at the same time. Meetings really only work with one person speaking and everyone else listening. And so that forms a natural limit on how much intelligence you can get, right? Like, unless I'm, 46 times more intelligent than the rest of you, we're leaving a lot of intelligence wasted while I'm speaking and you're all listening. And in the asynchronous space, I mean, I know I'm pretty smart, but 46 times, to be honest. In the asynchronous space, people can speak and listen at the same time. And if there's a topic that you're not interested in, you can skip past it. And if there's someone rambling for miles and miles and miles, you can scroll past that in a second in a way that you can't when it's a meeting and they're going on and on and on and on. So, moving right along. If it's got to do with data, if it's got to do with signing off last week's minutes, if it's anything that involves a report that you're going through line by line by line, do that on the computer. If you find yourself in a situation in a meeting where you're running out of time and you've got a really important decision to make and you're choosing, should I stay up extra late and let the kids suffer, or should we hurry up this decision now and just make a stupid decision, that's the point where you know you should be using something maybe like Loomio. Okay, another. You can hold that question until later.
So the point of active listening is that it is highly intelligent.
That's great, thank you. We're going to do a question thing at the end, which is going to engage the collective intelligence. If we have an onslaught of questions, it's going to be quite a different experience. So I'll do half of this slide. Every group that we've met on our journey has been somewhere between quite a bit and extremely frustrated with their communication technology. The only exception was a hippie commune that didn't have any communication technology. Communication is hard. Technology is hard. And you put those two together and you get a multiplication effect of just how frustrating it can be. It's really common to meet groups that are simultaneously drowning in information, being interrupted every 5 minutes, 6 different overflowing inboxes, and at the same time, paradoxically, I can never find the information that I need, right? I've got half of my team using this tool and the other half are using that tool, and there's no good reason why that exists, but it forms a relentless source of conflict and frustration. But because it's communication technology, it's boring, so it never gets to the top of the list, and we just let it fester. Lots and lots of different issues with communication technology. One of the slices to make it less terrible, there's many. One of them is to have some agreement about what tool is for what job. Okay, so if you ignore technology for a second and you just think about, let's say you're a builder on a construction site, and it's your first day, you don't know anything about construction, and your boss gives you a tool belt. You can tell immediately what those tools are for just by the way they look. Like a hammer, it's heavy and you hit things with it. And a saw is sharp and you cut things with a saw. This is a demonstration of good design. The form and the function are in alignment. You can tell what it does. The use of the tool is self-evident by the shape of the tool. Now we translate into the digital space, and tools like Gmail, WhatsApp, Facebook, whatever, they're not heavy and they're not sharp. They're rectangles with text and buttons, all of them. So that means everyone is coming at those tools with a different guess about what is this tool for. So it makes a huge difference if you can have a discussion, what tool is for what job, how are we using it, which ones are appropriate. This set of 3 is really old wisdom from digital communities, this idea that there are at least 3 different kinds of communication, so it makes sense to have them in 3 different communication spaces. There's a real-time feed. That's your chat room, your IRC, your Slack, your WhatsApp. It's very informal, and it's organized around, right now I'm thinking about this, what do you think? There's the asynchronous, which is a different mode. It's email, mailing list, Loomio, discussion forum. It's organized around a topic instead of around a time. And a lot of the frustration in groups is because they haven't got 2 different spaces. You want one for the chat and one for the thread, where the information lasts a lot longer and makes sense a lot longer. And then the third category is static or semi-static. So documents, Wiki, Google Docs, whatever you're using, handbooks, frequently asked questions. I told you technology is boring, so I'm going to move along. One of the most important ingredients that I in my opinion, about forming a coherent, harmonizing, humming team without forcing a management hierarchy onto them is to use rhythm to your advantage. And it's a little bit abstract. I'll try and explain. Say in the Loomio context, we have 10 people. Most of us are anarchists. We all want to do different things. We really prioritize our autonomy and our agency. We all want to, like, don't tell me what to do, I'm doing my thing. And yet somehow we want all those different creative beings to add up to something coherent. And the way that we find that coherence is with rhythm. So in our case, we've got a lot of different rhythms, and I'm going to name 2 of them in the interest of time. Every 3 months, we get the whole team together for a day, and we make an agreement by consensus, by the most enthusiastic consensus. These are our shared objectives for the next 3 months. We're going to find 50,000 new people to use Loomio. We're going to raise this much money. We're going to do whatever. Very specific agreement. And we'll spend all day negotiating and deliberating, and we'll actually finalize that decision on the Loomio software afterwards. That's our moment of consensus every 3 months. After that, you can relax. I don't need to keep a close eye on what the programmers are doing because we already agreed about our shared objectives. So I can relax and just delegate. The programmers will handle the programming decisions. We're not going to stop every minute. We also do daily rhythms, weekly rhythms, 6-monthly rhythms, but you're going to have to come to our longer workshop sometime. The point is we have different spaces for different kinds of conversations. So you know if you've got a very small suggestion, like I think we should change the office slightly, there's a space to take a small suggestion. And if you've got a very large suggestion, like we should change our entire strategy, there's another space to have that conversation. And just sorting out the little tactical questions from the very big strategic questions into different spaces makes things a lot more efficient. You've got space to hear from everyone, but you don't hear everything all at once. The other rhythm that I want to name happens every 2 weeks. And it comes from agile software development, and they call it a sprint, which is a terrible name because sprinting sounds like you're going very fast, and the point is you're going at a sustainable pace. Lots of things happen in a sprint. I'll tell you one of them. We do this thing called a retrospective every 2 weeks. And it's in the retrospective that we find these patterns that we're naming. And if you were to adopt a retrospective, you would find your own patterns. And the point is, we look back on firstly, we stop working. Like the laptops close and we're all focused. And like, it's the end of our 2-week period. And we look back and we say, what was good? What gave you energy? When were you really engaged, alive, productive, feeling good, happy? You write little post-it notes, this was good, that was good. What was bad? What was frustrating, depressing, unproductive, annoying, stinky? Like, write some of those down too. And then this is the breakthrough moment. Good, bad, change. What are we going to do differently next time? And every 2 weeks in our team, and many agile teams that run this way, there's some kind of adjustment happening out of that meeting. So we're going to change something. How about next sprint we try, there's no meetings on Wednesdays, or we're going to turn the whole office around 90 degrees, or why don't we have massages on Thursday afternoon? Or you're always hearing what's not working so well and just making a small adjustment. And you stay in the habit of making small adjustments every 2 weeks, or every week, or every month, whatever the rhythm is that works for you. So I'm getting some very serious eyes coming this way. We've got, 12 minutes left on the clock. That clock's fast. Spend 2 of those minutes. I invite you to spend 2 of those minutes in reflection, because we just ran through so much different stuff. Hopefully some of it is useful in the real groups that you're working in. So spend just a couple of minutes quietly. I would love to hear some questions. We've got a short amount of time. So if your question starts with, this is more of a comment than a question, really. Hold that one. Hold that one. You can talk to me afterwards. That's cool. But if you've got a question you think that would be interesting to other people to hear the answer to, is that a hand up?
Yes.
Great. Can we run across?
No, I'm happy to write this stuff down on the slides. Are the slides or is the workshop available online?
Yes. I will tweet the link to the slides. I'm Rich Decibels. Great question.
In your experience, does this work equally for organizations and communities?
Yes. I think the main thing is about the kind of conversations that you have. I don't know if you noticed, but majority of the things we talk about is talk about it. So it's talk about the things that you think that you can talk and try to make find solutions to the problems together. So sit with the others and do that. So it works fairly well. If it's a big community, I'll say it works better in smaller groups inside that community. So that's how it works in Inspiral. It's a smaller groups, and it replicates.
I'm part of quite a large online community, and we definitely need to use a lot of these ones, but I don't know where we would begin, where we would start.
Where to start? Where to start? There's kind of two questions in there. One is where to start. The other is, can we decentralize power if we don't spend time together? I don't know. I don't know if we can do that, but assuming we can, the place to start, you kind of start anywhere and you go anywhere. It's not like someone came along with all the answers for Loomio and then we're like, right, this is the structure that works for us. We just did lots of little experiments until we found the stuff that worked for us. One of the early ones we did was what's called a demo. So every 2 weeks, you get to show off to everyone else what you've worked on. And that shares information so people know what's going on around the place. But most importantly, I think, it gives an opportunity for everyone to have their work acknowledged. And that's where so much conflict comes from, is because people are working on something invisible, and when they get to show off and celebrate, hey, I did this work, that cuts half of your frustration out immediately. The other one that we did early on was the retrospective, and that's usually where we start with the group, is just we sit in a circle, we spend an hour or two saying what's going well and what's not going so well, and what are we going to do about it. And the first time there's usually some tears, but then after you get in the habit of doing this on a regular basis, you just hear small tensions and we can resolve them one piece at a time.
There was another question there, Will.
So I have this doubt, and I wanted to ask you about how you would go about that. In our cooperative, we have lots of things to do, because we're recently set up. And in many cases, we don't really follow all of your great, wonderful practices. We don't. I would imagine that it would take a lot of time, although the decisions would become better, right? How do you balance that? Do you have some interesting reflections about that?
Yeah, definitely. Like, if it's the first time that you're trying to do something and you're trying to do all of it, it's going to take a long time because you're getting used to it, you're learning the habits, you need to learn the new way of doing it. And you need to have a lot of conversations and decisions. Is it actually what we want to do? So all this is like things that you can bring on little by little over time. I certainly don't recommend to try to do everything at once. So if you are going to try one thing, try a retrospective. So then it's in that space where you can start naming different things that you're going to try on. Yeah. There was another person at the back, and then we'll bring it here. And after this person here, that I don't want to assume your gender, but I will try to encourage people that don't identify as a man to speak up if you have some questions, because I have heard, yeah.
Thanks. Hi. Do you have any advice on how to encourage a board of directors at a startup that are concerned about business risk to adopt a more decentralized approach when they're like fearful of that? Even if they can see the value, they're fearful.
Yeah. Is Iris in the room? If you see Iris around, they've got a great package that explains kind of the business argument for why participation, why decentralization. A lot of it is about resilience. Like Nati described, having our roles distributed. Like, someone can get hit by a bus and there's other people who know how to do the job. I mean, we're going to have a funeral because that's really sad, but the resilience counts for a lot. And the engagement, I mean, every business leader is concerned about engagement. And if you can demonstrate that you can improve engagement, improve well-being, improve productivity, these methods are unparalleled for that.
Do you have a model for how you compare different types of work and the level of input, the effort? Whether somebody's, in theory being more lazy than somebody else, or, oh, my type of work is more valuable than your type of work, and therefore if I do half the amount, then it's the same. I mean, those kind of questions that management deal with all the time. Yeah.
Okay, so a lot of people, especially people in the blockchain space, are really excited about the idea of contribution accounting, so you can track who contributed what. I have an alternative suggestion. Number one, invest in a culture where people can communicate openly. Number two, talk about how much effort you put in. How much effort did you contribute? As in, I prefer to have good conversations than to have a really complicated model with an excellent spreadsheet.
And account for all of the tasks. So, yeah.
Is it possible to use any of these decision-making protocols while remaining anonymous, so anonymously having those discussions?
Is your question about Loomio or anonymously where? Yeah.
So do you encourage debate?
Yeah.
And while having a safeguard also on the
Yeah. So, two things on that. One thing is on Loomio, it's now possible to make decisions anonymously. A lot of people have asked for it. We try to encourage places and organizations where people don't need to feel that they need to do it anonymously to feel safe. So that's another thing. And then it's up to each organization to figure it out what kind of decision-making protocols they use and how they use it, and maybe they want to create even new ones. So I don't think there's one recipe for everyone. There was another hand. Sorry, but I'm gonna, again, I'm really sorry. I don't want to assume your identified gender, but I'm gonna spread a little bit around.
Hi. When you're talking about power and power dynamics, I'm just curious, in the co-ops that we work with, they elect the leadership positions, and that's a rotating role, but that is also, there's no embedded system where they rotate equally, so they can, maybe elect the same people. And I've seen that a lot of it has to do with their social capital and who is, coming forth to be in those positions. So I'm just curious, and I know you're going to say you got to talk about it, but I'm curious about but as an outside person to the co-op, how do I bring those issues up? Do I use myself as an external person and say, hey, I'm observing this, or are there other things that you would suggest?
I think one thing is, yes, talk about it. As an external person, you can have that discussion if you have the space to have that discussion, if you're invited to do so. You can talk personally with people as well and say, hey, this is what I'm noticing, right? So it's not a space where you're shaming anyone or you're guilt-tripping them or anything like that, but it's more like a one-on-one discussion. And it's also about encouraging the people that don't feel that they can do it, right? So it's encouraging them to bring on those things. Okay, I think we're pretty much on time and over. I saw a face coming through being like, okay. So we are going to be around as well, so you can come and talk to us more and ask us questions. I'll have more coffee, so I'll be chirpy. Thanks everyone for coming.